Okay, welcome everyone. We are continuing in our series about the Sefirot in our larger series of fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We're getting closer to wrapping up. That almost sounds oxymoronic because we barely scratched the surface of the Sefirot, but we do want to get to other subjects. Tonight, what I want to do is I want to concentrate on one of the ideas we started with, but we really haven't really explored it, is the idea of using the Sefirot as an organizational model for ideas. So I'm going to explain that. And this is one of the biggest chidushim of Rabbi Ginsburg. Now, I want to say here, this is taking place as part of the students of Rabbi Ginsburg. And I have been a student for over 45 years now. And listen, there throughout the generations, there are so many great teachers, great books written, great commentaries. But it's not often you have someone who's it's called a mechadesh, someone who innovates whole new perspectives of the Torah. In other words, and this is not in any way, shape, or form a put down, but you could have someone who is a phenomenal Talmud teacher or a Chumash teacher. And what they do is they give over previous commentaries. So they're great teachers, they're indispensable, but we wouldn't necessarily call them a mechadesh, that they have introduced to the world whole new perspectives of understanding the Torah. There are people who teach Talmud who are like that. Rabbi Ginsburg is unique in how many innovative ideas he has introduced to Jewish learning. I could say that it will take many, many years, maybe generations of people learning his books to fully appreciate what he has done here. I'm saying that as an introduction because one of the greatest chidushim, one of the greatest innovative ideas that Rabbi Ginsburg has introduced is the subject of tonight's class, is using the Sefirot as an organizational model, a paradigm, in order to explain ideas. So what do I mean here? Is Rabbi Ginsburg has developed quite literally thousands of models based on the Sefirot. Well, he'll take a word, a verse, a person, a concept, an idea, and he will show the holistic, full picture of those things through using the Sefirot as the model. Now, many of you may have seen or participated. It's been a couple of years now, but for I believe close to 3 years, Rabbi Ginsburg gave a Sunday night class in English in Jerusalem, and I was the one who introduced the program. MC. I hear my wife in the background. I forgot the term, MC. And he spoke on many subjects over 3 years, but the one he did the most consistently, and hoping very much that a book will come out in English, is he took different people and he showed how the aspect of Keter was revealed. I'll just take Abraham. He showed the Keter of Avram. He showed the Chachma of Avram. He showed the Bina, the Dat, the Chesed, with the stories like the stories that we know in the Torah or Midrashim. But when you get to the end, you have this entire full picture of this person. Because let's say take Avram. If you ask anyone, what was the personality trait, or what was the sefira that most applied to Avram? Everyone would say Chesed. And that's absolutely true. Avram is most associated with Chesed. But what about all the other sefirot? Avram had Gevura. He had Yesod, he had Malchut, he had Bina. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go through two models. One model, which I'm going to share on the screen in a minute, is among the most important ones from Rabbi Ginsburg, because this is what he calls the Torah University. And the Torah Academy. And as we'll see in a minute, he's going to combine Torah and all secular sciences and art into a framework that could be the curriculum of a Torah Academy. Now, I want to explain this more. Around 130 years ago, I'm just saying approximately, there was a movement called Torah the Avoda. Torah and literally work. What was this? It primarily came out of Germany, and Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, was very, very identified with this movement. And the attempt was to show, and Rabbi Hirsch was very successful, that one could be an Orthodox Jew, a halachic Jew, and still have a profession, still work in the secular world. It wasn't mutually exclusive. Until then, it was not totally impossible, but it was close to that. And it was a cultural thing. If you learn Torah, what do you have to do with anything of the professions, of the sciences, of the arts, or the opposite? If you're in the arts or sciences, isn't that oxymoronic to be a religious Jew? So this movement, Torah Avoda, was meant to break down this way of looking at the world. What came out of this were many things, but one of them was Yeshiva University and Touro College. And now there are many, many ones like this. So Yeshiva University was set up to give Orthodox religious young people a chance to learn Torah and a secular science or art and a profession at the same time in the same school. This was totally unique. This was a great chiddush. It was a great innovative idea. Rabbi Ginsburg wants to take it one step further, and he's not the only one. And if you go to a good Jewish bookstore, you'll see the results of this, is that despite the tremendous advance that Yeshiva University and Touro College made, the curriculum still was, they learned Torah, and then they learned the sciences and the arts. What Rav Ginsburg is proposing, not just proposing, he's been doing it for 45 years. This is the other major innovative idea of Rav Ginsburg is whatever the subject is, and that's what we're going to be learning about in 1 minute, he combines Torah wisdom and secular knowledge into a holistic whole. So the idea of the Torah University or the Torah Academy is whatever the science is, whatever the art is, whatever the profession is, it is taught in a unified manner with Torah. So this is a tremendous thing. And if, like I said, if you go into a bookstore now or go online, you'll now see hundreds of books by different authors that, depending what the field is, whether it's psychology or medicine or physics or social work or education, books are being written showing the unification, the holistic unity between what the Torah has to teach about the subject and what secular knowledge has to teach, and it's unified into one presentation. So I am going to now, hopefully, there we go. Now, you just have to give me a second because I've disappeared here. Okay, just give me a second. There we go. No, let's see. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay, I'm going to. Oh. Sorry for the delay here. I'm just trying to make myself bigger here. And I don't remember how to do it. Okay, this is what it is. Everyone can see me though? Yeah? Okay. The important thing is this chart over here. This is what we're going to be learning now, okay? This is the Torah Academy, and we're going to go through it relatively quickly, but what we're doing here is an example of thousands of models that are based on the same idea. So here we're taking Torah wisdom and secular knowledge, and we are uniting them in a way that is structured according to the Sefirot. Okay, so we're going to start at the top, and remember, we've learned this, that there are 3 dimensions of Keter, the crown, and when we also count knowledge, Dat, we have 13 levels. So again, we're going to go through this relatively quickly, but hopefully everyone will get the idea. So we're going to start with the highest level of the crown is called faith. So the first question that people will ask is, well, what is this doing in a university? Like, what can you learn about faith? Well, the answer is quite a bit. Faith is the highest level of soul. And to understand faith, one has to understand the soul. And to understand this level of the crown, the whole crown is what's called the supraconscious. The supraconscious is then drawn down into the intellect, into the emotions, and into the instinctive behavioristic aspects of a human being. So faith is the highest level, and to touch this level, it entails prayer, meditation, and as we'll see in a minute, in learning also. So at the in the Torah Academy, again, we're showing it according to the Sefirot, the subject that is associated with the highest level of Keter is faith. And learning about faith and learning how to encourage one's own faith and what happens when there is a crisis of faith, and how Torah and Judaism is based on faith. Okay, the middle level of Keter is called Ta'anug. These are all concepts that we've learned is pleasure. And here is the study of Torah. So the question is, why isn't Torah in a different sphere? So there is a verse that says, Lule Toratcha Sha'ashu'ai Azavadati Be'onyi. If your Torah was not my highest level of pleasure, I would be lost. This is a pasuk. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach made up a very well-known tune. I think everyone knows the tune. Doesn't necessarily know that it went to these words. Is Lulei Toratcha Shashuai Azavadati Be'ani. So why is Torah with pleasure? Because those people who learn Torah, what's called lishma, for its own sake, know that there is no pleasure in the physical world that can even approximate the pleasure of learning Torah the way it could and should be learned. Again, this is something that we could go into great detail about, but here the point is that Torah is coming from a place above intellect. That's why we're not putting it by wisdom, because the source of the Torah is coming from Keter. What's called the Primordial Torah is coming from a place above intellectual consciousness. And that is connected to the greatest pleasure of the soul. The Baal Shem Tov, we have one letter from the Baal Shem Tov that he wrote to his brother-in-law, without going into the whole thing. And he describes that when you take the letters of the Torah and you put them together and you understand how they're manifest in worlds, souls, and divinity. These are also three things that we've learned about: Olamot, Neshamot, and Elokut. If we learn Torah and see how it's manifest in the world, in the soul, and in divinity, the Baal Shem Tov says, if there is a greater joy that comes from this, multiplied by almost infinity, then even a chatan and kala on wedding night, a groom and a bride on wedding, the joy of the wedding, he said, doesn't even touch the type of pleasure and joy we get from learning Torah. Okay, the next one is a surprising one, but it's such an insight, is the last supraconscious level of the soul is called will, ratzon. And here Rav Ginsburg has put art. Now that also might be surprising. But anyone who has any kind of artistic sense or creativity knows that it's coming from a higher place than intellect or emotions or even instinct. It's coming from the Keter. And I'm going to relay from the time I was a young teenager. I grew up with, not physically, but with Bob Dylan. It was just like his music and his words and his message just touched me so deeply. And I followed his career with its ups and its downs through all the years. But I think it's around 10 years ago, he's already at that time, he was in his late 60s. And he did an interview on a big TV station with a famous interviewer. I can't remember the person's name. And he asked him, he asked, like, where do your songs come from? Like, can you explain what's your inspiration? So Bob Dylan took one of the stanzas of Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man. If anyone knows this song, you can understand why he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. The poetry is like beyond. So Bob Dylan starts saying this stanza, and he looks at the interviewer and he says, who can make up such a thing like this? He said, I have no idea where it came from. He said, it was beyond me. He said, who could come up with something like this? And he was so serious. And then the guy asked him, can you still do this? And he said, no, even though apparently his new album has gotten rave reviews. He's in his late 70s, early 80s at this point. But I'm just telling this over because when Rav Ginsburg puts art in Keter, it's because that is the source of art. And I want to expand on this just a little bit, is art applies to everyone. If someone learns a profession and masters being in any profession, that's art. A mathematician that comes up with a brilliant formula, that's art. A sports person who masters their race or their whatever it is, it's Olympics now, that's a type of art. Someone who cooks and makes beautiful food, that's art. Someone who sews, everything, gardening, everything is art. But it's really coming from the expression is, do you have a green thumb? Some people have a green thumb, but it's coming from a higher place. And so the interesting thing is, if you look in Hebrew at the word for faith and art, it's the same root. It's amen, emunah, and umanut. And even the middle one in a different chart, Rav Ginsburg has it, there's the expression, Moshe emet v'torato emet. Moshe is true, and his Torah is true. So emet is the same root as umanut. So all three of the ones in Keter have the same root, emunah, emet, and umanut. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit faster. When you go to wisdom, chachma, this represents mathematics. Now, why is mathematics in wisdom? If you look at the word in Hebrew, it's cheshbon, which comes from the word choshev, to think. And the word in Hebrew for a thought is machshava, which is really choshev ma. When you permute the letters, it's thinking of what? Thinking of essence, thinking of the bigger picture. So today, mathematics is the basics of almost all science now. Doesn't matter if it's chemistry, biology, physics, in medicine, education, economics, everything is numbers. In fact, the whole computer system is a binary system of 0, 1, 0, 1. Everything is broken down into its most common denominator of mathematics. That's why mathematics is in wisdom. Like we say, kulam b'chachma asita. You made everything with wisdom. But that's the same thing. That's why Rav Ginsburg puts mathematics by wisdom, because everything is graphs and charts and numerical equivalences, everything. So that's why mathematics is in wisdom. All the natural sciences is in understanding Bina. Again, what is Bina? Lahavin devar betoch devar. To understand one thing from another thing. All the natural sciences, again, chemistry, biology, physics, quantum physics, are all attempts to go deeper and deeper into explaining what reality is, explaining what the body is, explaining what the molecular structure of the universe is, the structure of the atom, whatever it is. It's lahavin devar betoch devar, all the sciences. And it's on experimentation and empirical challenging ourselves to find deeper reasons and deeper explanations, and then transforming them into formulas that can actually better our lives. The next one is knowledge psychology. Now, we always talk about that knowledge and crown, Keter and Dot, are mirror images of each other. So we started, the highest level was faith, to learn about faith. And I said, to learn about faith, you have to learn about the soul. This is brought down in psychology. Psychology is the study of the soul. It's the study of the human psyche. What makes us tick? What is our superconscious? What is our unconscious? What is our subconscious? What is our id? What is our ego? In other words, what makes us tick? And when there are problems, what can heal them? So Dot is the perfect place for psychology, very connected to the Eitz Hadat, Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Anyone who reads the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is reading the deepest, most profound psychological picture of the human condition that we could get. If one learns that story to its depths, it is a psychological framework to understand the existential reality of a human being. The next one is a very obvious one. In Chesed, loving kindness, are the social sciences. because anyone involved in the social sciences must have deep down inside them this basic feeling of, I want to help people. I don't want to do research. I don't want to be in a lab. I want to help people. I want to get out there and help people. So that's an obvious one, is the social sciences. The next one is also an obvious one. In Gevura, might is law, because one of the aspects of Gevura is called judgment. So this is an obvious one, that law is associated with Gevura. Now I'm going a little bit faster because there are other things I want to get to. The next one is Tiferet and beauty, and this is medicine. Now, one of the secrets here is that if you take the word in Hebrew, refuah, so the root of the word beauty is pe'er, Pei Aleph Resh. If you change those letters around, it spells healing, refuah. It is the word in modern Hebrew, a doctor is called a rofeh. It's the same letters as beauty. So what, but more than that, why is medicine and beauty? I believe we've discussed this somewhere along the way, is that the secret of good health is what's called the golden middle path. Tiferet is right in the middle of the Sefirot. And the Rambam Maimonides wrote about this extensively in his different books on medicine. The whole thing is not too much of this, not too much of that, not too hot, not too cold, not too sour, not too sweet, not to eat too much, not to eat too little, etc. In other words, the whole idea, that's what we call modern medicine is now accepted, what is called alternative medicine. And alternative medicine is not just treating the symptom, it's treating the whole person, including their psychological makeup. That's the connection of medicine to Tiferet. The next one is Netzach, victory, and this is education. And again, just a simple thought is the Netzach, remember, also means minatseach, which means conduct, to be a conductor. The other meaning of Netzach is eternal. So these two things tell us the real goals of education is to teach over eternal values, not just facts, not just to get people ready for the workplace and a profession, but to help a person incorporate and live a moral, ethical, good, kind life. That should be the goal of education. And the idea of being a conductor is teaching people how to balance and juggle all the demands of life, and I'll say especially modern life, learning how to juggle, learning how to be well-rounded, how to spread themselves not too thin, but at the same time be able to multitask at the same time. The next one is Hod, and this is economics. This is a less obvious one, but Rav Ginsburg is just right on here, is Hod means acknowledgement, and the inner dimension of Hod is Tamimut, is sincerity. So Rav Ginsburg explains that a real ethical economic system is where everyone acknowledges the importance of being honest and giving everyone a fair shake. if the whole thing of economics is everyone is cutthroat, everyone's out to make as much money, and it doesn't matter how moral, ethical it is, that's really not a good basis for an economy. Economy should be based on acknowledging the needs of society and the need to be honest and sincere in making a product that's not going to break in the next day. Like everyone comments that they used to make things to last 20, 30, 40 years. The way things are made now are made on purpose to be obsolete in 7, 8 years. That's how they're made. Because why? We'll sell more refrigerators that way. I don't have an obligation to the buyer to sell him the best product that I could produce. No, I want to make as much money as I can. That's not a good way for society to base an economic system. So that fits in with Hod beautifully. The next one are the communication sciences. Rav Ginsburg puts this in foundation, yesod. In Hebrew, it's tikshoret, from the word kesher, which means connection. In Hebrew, communication is tikshoret. Media is the tikshoret. Because, as we said many times, all the other sefirot have to be funneled through yesod. And it's not a coincidence. It's not a by chance that the entire world now is connected through communication and media. Our entire world now is connected economically, politically, socially, you name it. And our hope is, as we get closer to the Messianic era, also spiritually connected. So the fact that communication sciences fits in Yesod, that is the foundation of our world right now. That is the foundation. It's all, look at what we're doing right now. I'm looking at all these little squares of people who are all over the globe, and we're able to learn Torah. Unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable. And the last one is Malchut, which is political science. In Hebrew, it's called Medina, Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. And this is an obvious one, because here, first of all, on a spiritual level, when we came into Eretz Yisrael, the idea was to set up what we call a kingdom of God on earth, but a real one, a practical one, a working society that can incorporate the Torah and all the secular knowledge and all Torah wisdom into a society that knows how to operate. That's what political science is. Unfortunately, politics has gotten such a bad name everywhere because there's so many scandals and so many ego-driven people and dictators and autocrats, and it's spoiled the whole thing. But to build a state or a country that works, that is really a noble enterprise, something that works for everyone. That's what political science should lead us to. So we've gone through this model, okay? Stop position is closed, okay? Okay. 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 I think I made myself a little bit bigger, but I'm still somewhat, you know, see, Okay. Okay, that's the best I can do here. Back to the drawing board. Okay, we are going to continue now. Okay, to do this properly, I would need a lot more time, but I really don't want to do just one chart. I want to do a second model here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through relatively quickly. We're going to look at the Torah by going through the Sefirot. In other words, what's the Keter of the Torah? What's the Chachma of the Torah? What's the Bin of the Torah? What's the Chesed of the Torah? So very, very quickly, this is my model. This is not Rav Ginsburg's model. I can say, though, that most of what I'm saying is I've learned from Rav Ginsburg, but I didn't learn this model as hopefully a good student of my teacher. So I also create many, many models based on the Sefirot. And this is one of them, but it's very, very revealing. So again, we're going to do this relatively quickly. So the Keter of the Torah. So the 10 Commandments has 620 letters. 620 equals Keter. And that's what we mentioned before, that the source of the Torah is at the highest level of Keter. It's supraconscious. It's above intellect. It has logic, but it's supra-logical. So that's one of the connections to Keter. When we receive the Torah at Sinai, this is about the Torah and the receiving of the Torah and the giving of the Torah. We said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. And we're told that this is the highest statement of faith. We were saying, God, we will do the Torah even before you even give it to us. We just trust that what you're giving to us is what's best for us. We're going to do it, and then hopefully we'll hear, we'll come to understand. So that's always held down as the highest level of faith. What's the highest level of Keter? Faith. What's the last level of Keter? Is Ratzon, will. So we always say, cannot be said enough, that the Torah is an expression of God's will. That is what the Torah is. The Torah is the way that God expresses to us, teaches us, gives over to us what his Ratzon is, what his will is. Now, obviously, each of these ideas we could go into much deeper, but these are two very, very important ideas of the connection of Keter and Torah. The next one is Chachma, wisdom. So it says in the Zohar, Torah michachma nafkat. Torah comes out from wisdom. Now, wait a minute. We just said that Torah is coming from Keter. So when you go deep into Kabbalah, we see that there's like a bridge, as it were, between will and wisdom, between Ratzon and Chachma. So when we say the Torah comes out from wisdom, what it means is the Torah that's written in the language that human beings can understand is coming from wisdom. And that's why a scholar is called a Talmid Chacham, a pupil of wisdom. What wisdom? The wisdom of the Torah. The wisdom of the Torah in Keter has to be brought down into this world. This is, without going into it, there's a famous midrash that Moshe Rabbeinu comes up to Har Sinai and God is teaching him the Torah. And the angels come and say, Master of the world, why are you giving the Torah, which was created 974 generations before creation, why are you giving it to human beings? Meaning, they can't understand the Torah. And in the Midrash, God says to Moshe, you answer them. So Moshe takes just stories from the Torah about, I don't know, I can't remember the examples, but killing, about someone digs a hole and someone's cow falls into it. Someone breaks down their neighbor's fence. And Moshe says to them, can you relate to any of this? Like, this is not your world. This Torah is meant for us. But there's a deep, unbelievable question here. What was the Havamina of the angels? I mean, what were the angels thinking? They didn't know what the Torah said. Why were they saying this is not meant for human beings? Without going deeply into it, my next book, hopefully there's a huge article about this, Bezrat Hashem, give me a bracha that it could come into the world. There's Torah on many different levels. The Torah that the angels were relating to is called the Torah Keduma, the primordial Torah. It's the same Torah, the same letters, but it's understood on such a higher level. The angels say, why are you giving this Torah to human beings? Because the way they understood the Torah was, in a sense, beyond the world. And Moshe would say, well, that's good for you. But in our world, the world of wisdom, of Chachma, Torah comes from Chachma, this is our Torah. Again, this is an idea we could go into much, much deeper. What about the Bina of the Torah? So we know that the concept always connected to Bina are the 50 gates of understanding. Chamishim Sha'arei Bina, the 50 gates of understanding. So which day after Pesach was the Torah given? On the 50th day. That's the deep connection with Bina. It was given on the 50th day. And in the Jewish calendar, what is the 50th year called? The Jubilee year. The year of literally freedom. The Yovel really means a year of freedom. And remember, it says that on the first tablets that God wrote with the finger of God, Charut al haluchot, engraved on the tablets. And the sages say, I believe we learned this in the Sunday class. For those who were there, don't read it Charut, Ella Cherut. Don't read it engraved on the tablets. Read it freedom on the tablets. Freedom, Yovel, the 50th year, is always associated with Bina. And the Torah is given on the 50th day. What about Dat? So this goes with the whole learning that in the Garden of Eden, the reason God said, don't eat from the Eitz Hadat, Dat and knowledge, is because we needed to eat from the tree of life first, and then we could have eaten from the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra. Adam and Eve reversed it, and that was, and will be until it's fixed the whole problem. In other words, the Eitz HaChaim is the Torah. The tree of life is the Torah. If a person absorbs, integrates Torah, and then experience. Now remember, the name Chava in Hebrew means experience. Chavaya in modern Hebrew means experience, Chavaya. So what they did, they reversed the order. First, they put experience, and then they wanted to eat from the tree of life. But it had to be in the other order. So we're talking about dot. So what's the dot of Torah? Torah is the way that we can fix having eaten from the tree of knowledge before eating from the Torah. The Torah, for each person individually, gives us the tools and the way to look at the world, to act in the world with Torah first, and then experience following that. There's much more that we could say about this. Chesed, so one of the ways that Torah is referred to is Torah Chesed. This is in Eshet Chayil, when it's talking about a woman of valor. It's she's connected to Torah Chesed on her lips. And in the Gemara, it says the entire Torah begins with Chesed and ends with Chesed. And I believe that the examples that are brought is that God put Adam and Eve together. In other words, he arranged the marriage. That was the Chesed that God did. And the Torah ends with God, as it were, burying Moshe, which is a big mitzvah to be involved in a proper Jewish a funeral and the way that we do a burial. So the Gemara says the Torah is chesed from its beginning to its end. And I'll just mention that we're going back 20 years that Rav Ginsburg and his students set up a women's seminary. And it ran for 2 or 3 years. I had the great privilege of teaching in it. And like anything, kol hatchalot kashot, all beginnings are hard. It's not easy to start a whole new seminary. And there was a learning curve. But by the 3rd year, we really had kind of worked out the kinks, and it was really starting to really flow, and the intifada happened. And that all the parents pulled their children out of Israel, and that was the end of that. I'm only mentioning it because Rav Ginsburg named the seminary Torah Chesed, the Torah of Chesed. Gevura, so there's much to say about this. The 2 things I will say is there are different ways that we refer to God. Like one of them, not names of God, but expressions. Like one is hamakom, the place. Especially someone who's sitting Shiva after they lost a close family member. And one of the things we say, we comfort them by saying hamakom yinachem. The place, we refer to God as the place. But the way that the sages refer to God when he's giving the Torah is mipi hagvura, from the mouth of Gevura. Now the reason for this is that the verse introducing the 10 Commandments uses the name Elokim. Vayedaber Elokim et kol hadavarim ha'elu lemor. And God spoke all of these things saying, and then the 10 Commandments. So it's the name Elokim, which is associated with Gevura. And in a deeper level, the Gevura of the Torah, first of all, there's judgment in the Torah, there's law. It's not like wishy-washy. The whole Torah is instruction of how to establish a law-abiding ethical, moral society. We just learned that in the Torah Academy. But on a deeper level, Gevurah is always connected to what's called Tzimtzum, which is how God contracted his infinite being in order to make a place for the world. And so God took his infinite being and contracted his will into the letters of the Torah. This is an enormous contraction of the infinite essence and will of God into letters in the Torah. So this is the idea of Torah associated with Gevurah. Next, we have Tiferet, and Tiferet is always the merging of Chesed and Gevurah. And so we just learned that on one hand, the Torah is full of law, judgment, punishments, consequences. On the other hand, it's full of Chesed and loving kindness. So Torah is really the merging of both of these into Tiferet. Netzach, as we learned just a few minutes ago, means eternal. And again, here is the Torah is eternal. It existed before the world, and as it were, it will exist after the world. The concept of Torah is eternal because it's one with God. God and the Torah are one, and God is eternal, and the Torah is eternal. And again, just like we learned about education in the Torah Academy, through the Torah, we learn eternal truths and values to base our lives. Hod, we can understand in many different ways, but with the giving of the Torah, there was incredible physical phenomena that were happening. Things were shaking, lightning, thunder, all of the heavens merged together, all of the senses, synesthesia. And this was a revelation. It was the greatest revelation of the glory of God. One of the meanings of Hod is glory, splendor. This was the most revealed expression of God's glory ever. Individuals have experiences, have prophecy or prophetic experience. But this was an entire people were witnessing the glory of God. And also when Moshe came down with the tablets, finally, if you remember, it says his face was beaming. And the beams of light were so visible that the Torah even calls them like horns. Instead of beams, they were like horns, and that's where Michelangelo gets the horns, is he didn't understand the deeper meaning. But these beams of light were called Karnei Hod. They were beams of glory that were shining from Moshe because of his receiving the Torah and being so close to God. Yesod, so Yesod, foundation, one of its associations is always with sexual energy. And before the Torah was given, so God commanded that they should prepare themselves for 3 days. And part of the preparation was that husbands and wives did not have marital relations. In other words, they were preparing themselves to enter into the covenant. The Yesod is always connected to the male organ. And of course, the circumcision, the covenant is in the male organ. And part of receiving the Torah is what's called tikkun abrit, of rectifying the covenant. And it was as if by receiving the Torah, in a sense, we all entered into the covenant with God. And the last one is Malchut, is kingdom. And again, the whole idea of the Torah is that we should be able to establish the kingdom of God in this world, to bring heaven down to earth. And the Torah is our guide. It is our Malchut. It is our kingship. That's why we say 100 blessings today. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. We're constantly acknowledging God as our true king. And that's why Mashiach is called Melech HaMashiach, a kingly figure. And one last thing is that we know that at Mount Sinai, we received the written Torah, the beginning of the process through the Ten Commandments, at the beginning of the process of what's called the written Torah. But we know that what was Moshe doing on the mountain for 40 days? And actually, he was really there for 3 periods of 40 days. He was learning the oral Torah, because we absolutely cannot understand whatsoever the written Torah without the oral Torah. So in Petach Eliyahu, a Kabbalistic piece, part of the Zohar, where it gives references or names to the different Sefirot. For Malchut, it's Torah Shebal Peh Korinin La. Malchut is called the oral Torah because that's the kingship is dependent on the oral Torah to explain the written Torah. Without the oral Torah, we can't understand. That's why there's so much misunderstanding by other religions about Judaism, because they read it in English based on the King James Version, based on the Latin, based on the Greek, based on the original. But even Jews, if you're just reading it in English and you have no tradition behind it, no oral Torah, there's no way to understand it. So that's the aspect of Torah in Malchut. So what hopefully we did here, this is just one example. We took a concept, Torah, and we showed that it is holistic. That every single one of the Sefirot represents, symbolizes, channels, aspects of the Torah. And this is true of everything. So we went through 2 models tonight, and they were somewhat different, but actually quite similar. And next week, hopefully, we are going to, instead of delving deeply into into just 1 or 2, we're going to try to do a survey of different models, just to give people more of an idea of how holistic and how meaningful it is to start to see the world and see our inner world through the lens of the Sefirot. So we should be blessed to continue our learning further and further.